We often look at aging as an inevitable slide into decline. We assume that by the time we reach 80, if we reach 80, our mental faculties will be a shadow of what they once were. We anticipate memory loss, slower processing speeds, and a general fog descending over our minds. But then, you meet them, the Super-Agers. These are individuals in their 8th or 9th decade who possess the cognitive sharpness, energy, and mental flexibility of someone 30 years younger. They are engaged, curious, and vibrant. The existence of Super-Agers forces us to ask a crucial question. What is the difference between a brain that succumbs to accelerated aging and a brain that stays ageless? For years, the assumption was largely genetic luck. But cutting-edge neuroscience and gerontology are revealing a different story. The trajectory of your cognitive health is not entirely written in your DNA. A significant portion of neuroaging is epigenetics and lifestyle, specifically the mental frameworks and habits you adopt in middle age. The science is clear. You cannot stop the chronological clock, but you absolutely can influence the biological clock of your brain. Today, we are going to dive deep into the neuroscience of the ageless brain. We will move beyond simplistic advice like do crossword puzzles and explore the fundamental shifts in mindset and behavior that structurally protect your gray matter. We will examine how your brain silently ages without you noticing, a simple physical test to gauge your current neural health, and most importantly, the 3 specific neuropsychological frameworks that Super-Agers use to defy the statistical odds. It sounds deceptively simple. Stand on one leg and close your eyes. The ability to maintain balance without visual cues requires complex integration between your brain's visual cortex, vestibular system, and proprioception centers. It is a high bandwidth task for the nervous system. If you cannot hold that position with your eyes closed for at least 30 seconds, it may indicate that neural aging is progressing faster than you realize. The good news is that practicing this, training your brain to handle that complex integration, can actually improve neural circuitry. But physical exercises are only part of the puzzle. The primary driver of an ageless brain sits firmly in the realm of psychology. The terrifying thing about brain aging is its invisibility. You don't wake up one day suddenly unable to think clearly. It is a slow, insidious creep. Neuroimaging studies indicate that our brains begin a slow process of atrophy as early as our 30s. By the mid-60s, this shrinkage can often be clearly visible on an MRI scan. If left unchecked, this leads to what neuroscientists sometimes refer to as the senescent brain, characterized by rigidity, memory lapses, and emotional deregulation. We often joke about memory loss, but there is a more subtle, social indicator of brain aging that hits many people in middle age. Research suggests that our raw information processing speed peaks around age 18 and slowly declines. However, other abilities peak much later. Vocabulary, for instance, often peaks as late as age 67. This is called crystallized intelligence. But there is a critical cognitive skill that takes a nosedive in midlife: the ability to accurately read the emotions of others. Studies show this social cognition ability peaks around age 48 and then can drop sharply in the 50s and 60s. When the brain loses its ability to easily model the internal states of others, behavioral changes occur. A person might stop caring about social graces. They might become more rigid, easily frustrated, or inappropriately angry when things don't go their way. We often stereotype this as becoming grumpy with age, but it is frequently a symptom of declining neural processing in specific brain regions. The Super-Ager, however, maintains this social cognition peak well into their 70s and 80s. So, before we look at the solutions, how do you gauge where you stand right now? Since you cannot easily scan your own brain, we look for physical biomarkers that correlate with neural integrity. There is a simple diagnostic often used in longevity research: the single leg stance test. It sounds deceptively simple. Stand on one leg and close your eyes. The ability to maintain balance without visual cues requires complex integration between your brain's visual cortex, the vestibular system, and proprioception centers. It is a high-bandwidth task for the nervous system. If you cannot hold that position with your eyes closed for at least 30 seconds, it may indicate that neural aging is progressing faster than you realize. The good news is that practicing this, training your brain to handle that complex integration, can actually improve neural circuitry. But physical exercises are only part of the puzzle. The primary driver of an ageless brain sits firmly in the realm of psychology. The first, and perhaps most powerful framework for an ageless brain is mastering your subjective age. This is not about denial. It is about understanding a powerful biological reality. Your brain does not know when you were born. It only knows the signals you send it today. If you constantly reinforce the idea that you are old, your brain will obligingly begin to shut down systems that are no longer needed. It is a self-fulfilling biological prophecy. The most famous demonstration of this is the counterclockwise study conducted by Harvard psychologists in 1979. Researchers took a group of men in their late 70s and early 80s and transported them to a retreat center that had been meticulously retrofitted to look exactly like 1959. The movies, the music, the magazines, the furniture, everything was from 20 years prior. The men were instructed not just to reminisce, but to live as if it were 1959. They had to speak about past events in the present tense. They were treated not as elderly patients, but as capable, middle-aged men. After just 5 days in this environment, the results stunned the scientific community. The men didn't just feel better. Their physical biomarkers of aging reversed. Their vision improved. Their hearing sharpened. Joint flexibility increased. Their grip strength improved. On cognitive tests, their scores soared compared to a control group. Amazingly, when independent observers looked at before and after photos of the men, they judged the after photos to feel significantly younger. By changing their mindset, by shifting their subjective age back 20 years, their biology followed suit. Super-Agers intuitively understand this. They do not act their chronological age, they act their subjective age. They do not adopt the posture of an elderly person. They do not avoid new experiences because they are too old for that. The moment you decide you are too old to learn a new technology, travel to a new place, or wear a certain style of clothing, you send a signal to your brain that growth is finished. And a brain that stops growing starts dying. The first rule of the ageless brain is to program it with the belief of vitality, regardless of the candles on the cake. The second critical shift involves understanding the changing neurochemistry of motivation. Many people find that as they hit their 50s and 60s, their drive seems to evaporate. The ambition that fueled their career, the hunger for status, even basic appetites seem to dull. This is often misinterpreted as a psychological failing or depression. It is usually simple biology. In our younger years, our primary motivational driver is dopamine. Dopamine is the molecule of more. It drives seeking behavior, seeking resources, mates, status, and novelty. It is high-energy rocket fuel. However, the brain's dopamine system naturally declines with age. Dopamine receptors become less dense. Relying on the dopamine-fueled ambition of your 30s to motivate you in your 60s is like trying to run a car with an empty tank. If you don't adjust, you become sedentary and disengaged, accelerating brain aging. Super-Agers successfully execute what we call a neurochemical pivot. They shift their motivational fuel source from dopamine to oxytocin. Oxytocin is often called the love hormone or bonding hormone. It is released during social bonding, trust building, and acts of generosity or caregiving. Unlike dopamine, which declines, research indicates that oxytocin signaling may actually increase or become more sensitive as we age. From an evolutionary standpoint, this makes sense. Elders played a crucial role in social cohesion and caretaking. This means that as we get older, Our brains are biologically wired to find deeper satisfaction and neuroprotective benefits not from achieving, but from connecting. The ageless brain is fueled by strong social bonds. Studies consistently show that loneliness is as damaging to health as smoking and is a primary risk factor for cognitive decline. Conversely, strong social integration is highly protective. Super-Agers do not isolate themselves, they lean into community. They derive purpose from contributing to others, mentoring, or spending quality time with family. They replace the thrill of the chase, dopamine, with the glow of connection, oxytocin. By aligning their behavior with their brain's changing chemistry, they maintain high levels of engagement and mental health. The third framework deals with the literal programming language you use on your own mind, your daily speech. There is a concept in psychology called priming. It means that exposure to one stimulus influences your response to a subsequent stimulus without you being aware of it. In a classic experiment at New York University, researchers had participants unscramble sentences. One group was given neutral words. The other group was subtly primed with words associated with the elderly, such as Florida, forgetful, bald, or gray. The words did not explicitly mention age, just associations. Yet, when the participants left the experiment room, the researchers secretly timed how long it took them to walk down the hall to the elevator. The group primed with elderly words walked significantly slower than the control group. Just reading words associated with aging caused their brains to physically simulate the state of being old and frail. Your words are commands to your nervous system. If your daily vocabulary is filled with phrases like, "I'm so tired," "I'm getting too old for this," "My memory is shot," or "That's too complicated for me," you are aggressively priming your brain for decline. You are instructing your brain to lower its energy output and cease forming new connections. Furthermore, negative language increases cortisol, the stress hormone, which is known to be toxic to the hippocampus, the brain's memory center. Super-Agers are extremely vigilant about their internal and external dialogue. They avoid language that reinforces limitations. However, we are human. We get tired. We get frustrated. We cannot simply pretend everything is perfect all the time. This is where a cognitive reframing technique known as the but rule comes into play. The brain has a recency bias. It tends to weigh the last piece of information it received most heavily. The but rule hacks this tendency. The rule is simple. You are never allowed to end a sentence on a negative limitation. You must immediately follow any negative statement with the word but, followed by a positive reframing or action. Instead of saying, "I am so exhausted today," you say, "I am so exhausted today, but I managed to complete that difficult project." Instead of saying, "I can't understand this new technology," you say, "I can't understand this new technology right now, but I am going to ask my nephew to give me a 10-minute tutorial tomorrow." By using the but rule, you acknowledge the reality of the situation, but you refuse to let your brain dwell in the state of limitation. You force a cognitive pivot toward agency and competence. This keeps the brain in a growth-oriented state rather than a fix. When you adopt these three frameworks, maintaining a youthful, subjective age, pivoting to oxytocin-fueled connection, and vigilantly programming your language with the but rule, your behaviors naturally start to change. You stop avoiding novelty. You might embrace complex digital tools not just for convenience, but as deliberate cognitive training to build new neural pathways. You stop seeking isolation and instead consciously create roles for yourself where you are significant to others, whether through volunteering, grandparenting, or community leadership. Knowing that feeling needed is profound neuroprotection. And perhaps you rethink retirement. You realize that while you might step back from the dopamine-driven rat race, total disengagement is deadly to the brain. You might shift toward roles that utilize your crystallized intelligence, mentoring, teaching, consulting, or writing, using the accumulated wisdom of decades to stay mentally vigorous. The brain is incredibly plastic. It is constantly reshaping itself based on the demands you place upon it. If you demand little of it, it will wither. If you demand engagement, connection, and growth, it will rally its resources to meet that demand, regardless of your chronological age. The choice of which signal to send is yours, every single day.